You are starving. Your hands will not stop shaking. The crate finally cracks open. Not bullets, not bandages, chocolate, coffee, cigarettes, sugar. Enough food for a full day packed so neatly it feels wrong. For 1 second, nobody moves. Even the wind sounds louder. Karl Weiss, 19, a German radio runner with his mother's last postcard folded inside his coat, just stares at the American ration in his frozen hands. He has seen men argue over crumbs. He has watched soldiers scrape the grease from empty tins with blackened fingernails. But this looks clean, measured, certain. As if somewhere beyond this forest, beyond the smoke, beyond the broken roads and dead engines, there is still a world where men expect tomorrow. Then someone beside him whispers, barely above the wind, "How are we supposed to defeat people who eat like this?" Karl drops to one knee in the snow and begins pulling the pieces out one by one. A small green can, dry biscuits wrapped tight, a stick of gum, a powdered drink packet, coffee, sugar, a chocolate bar hard as wood in the cold, cigarettes. The items keep coming, and each one feels less like food and more like an insult. Not because it is luxurious, because it is organized. Because every piece belongs exactly where it should. Because someone far away had imagined hunger, thirst, cold, fear, and exhaustion, and packed an answer for each of them. The men around him do not speak like victors. They speak like intruders who have accidentally opened a door into a life no longer available to them. One of them lets out a nervous laugh. Another snatches the cigarette pack and turns it over as if it might be fake. A third man mutters, "This is one meal?" And the oldest among them answers, in a voice so tired it barely sounds human, "No, that's the worst part. It isn't." Karl has not eaten a warm meal in 2 days. His stomach does not growl anymore. It tightens, then goes quiet, as if it has learned not to ask. His toes are numb. The wool inside his boots is damp and stiff. Every breath cuts his throat. He still keeps touching the postcard in his pocket, not to read it, because he already knows every line by heart, but to remind himself that there was once a kitchen table, a lamp, steam rising from a bowl, and a voice calling him in from the cold. Out here, memory is dangerous. It makes the hunger sharper. Yet this ration does something worse than hunger. It gives shape to what he has been trying not to think. If the enemy can send food like this to the front, sealed, sorted, and ready to eat in the snow, then what else can they send? More fuel, more shells, more men, more days, more war. Karl does not taste victory in that box. He tastes distance. He tastes factories he will never see. Karl fumbles with the little metal opener, his fingers too stiff to work it at first. The others crowd in close, not because they are greedy, but because they want proof. Proof that this is real. Proof that the smell rising from the can is actual meat and not a trick of the cold. When the lid finally peels back, a warm animal scent does not come out. It is too cold for that. But there is still a smell, salt, fat. Food that was made for movement, for endurance, for men expected to keep going. The biscuits are pale and dry, but whole, not crushed. The gum is still wrapped. The coffee packet is dry. The sugar has not clumped. Even the cigarette pack looks untouched by weather, as if mud and snow have not been invited inside. Karl hears one soldier whisper, "They even have gum." Another says, "And coffee." Then a third voice, bitter and flat, says the line that sinks into Karl deeper than the cold ever could. They don't go to war like us. They go to war prepared. For one brief moment, it feels like salvation. A few bites, a drag of a cigarette, one swallow of hot drink, if they can melt snow later. A tiny, stupid human hope enters the group. Some even smile. And that is the cruelest thing of all, because smiles have become dangerous in this forest. They make men forget where they are. Karl breaks a biscuit and puts half in his mouth. It is dry, plain, almost tasteless, yet his body reacts like he has swallowed life itself. His jaw aches from chewing. He feels ashamed for how quickly he wants the rest. A soldier beside him is already trying to pocket the chocolate. Another is counting cigarettes with the intensity of a banker. Then the silence breaks. The explosion lands somewhere beyond the ridge. close enough to shake snow from the branches. Every head snaps up. Another blast follows, then another. False peace. Gone in 3 seconds. The crate is forgotten. Men throw themselves down. Carl shoves the open ration against his chest as if it were ammunition. The barrage stops as quickly as it began. That is worse. The silence afterward feels planned. Carl lifts his head slowly, ears ringing, breath fogging in short bursts. Nobody knows whether to run, hide, or keep eating. That is what the war has become now. Men frozen between instinct and necessity, unable to choose whether survival means moving or swallowing. One soldier laughs again, but this time he sounds close to breaking. He points at the ration in Carl's hand and says, "Imagine dying beside this." No one answers, because they all understand what he means. It is not only food, it is evidence. Evidence that somewhere on the other side, someone has solved problems they have not. Not heroism, not courage, problems, water, calories, packaging, variety, small things that keep a man standing 1 hour longer, then 1 day longer, then 1 month longer. Carl suddenly realizes the most frightening part is not the chocolate, or the coffee, or the cigarettes. It is the thought behind them. As they move deeper into the trees, Carl keeps one biscuit in his cheek and the rest of the ration inside his coat. It presses cold against his ribs. With every step, he feels the edges of the cardboard and the round shape of the can. It should comfort him. Instead, it feels like he is carrying a message he never wanted to receive. Around him, the men start talking in fragments, the way exhausted people do when the truth is too large to say plainly. They have sugar at the front. Even their cigarettes come packed dry. There was drink powder in mine. Mine had chocolate. Then, after a long stretch of crunching snow and white breath, someone behind Carl says quietly, "If this is what one soldier carries, what must their depots look like?" No one speaks for several seconds. That is the moment the ration changes from food into fear. Not fear of being shot, not fear of being surrounded, fear of scale, fear of a machine so large it can afford comfort in combat. Carl opens another section while walking, half blind with hunger and disbelief. There are more details than he expects. Small things, humble things, a matchbook, toilet paper, a purification tablet, tiny conveniences that would mean almost nothing in peacetime and almost everything here. That is what gets him. Anyone can imagine canned meat and biscuits, but toilet paper, gum, a neat packet of coffee, these are not the contents of a desperate army improvising one more week. These are the contents of an army that assumes continuity. An army that expects transport lines to function, factories to keep running, paper to keep printing, workers to keep packing, and ships to keep arriving. Carl looks at the little tablet in his glove and cannot stop staring. Somebody had planned even for bad water. Somebody had imagined a thirsty man kneeling by melted snow and made room for that problem inside a box small enough to carry under one arm. He whispers to himself, "They pack tomorrow." The squad halts near a ditch lined with frozen brush. Their sergeant, a broad-shouldered man with a gray scarf and the eyes of someone who stopped hoping months ago, takes one look at the ration in Carl's hands and asks where he got it. Carl points back toward the abandoned vehicle. The sergeant says nothing at first. He just takes the box, examines it, then hands it back as if it burns. Finally, he says, "Eat it. We move in 2 minutes." But when one of the younger soldiers asks, "Do you think their officers get better food than this?" the sergeant gives a strange little smile. "That," he says, "is the part you still don't understand." The boy frowns. The sergeant looks out into the white trees and says, almost like a confession, "This probably isn't special." Nobody breathes after that. Carl feels the biscuit turn to paste in his mouth. Not special, not a prize, not an officer's luxury. Just standard, just normal, just what they carry. Stay with me, because this is where everything changes. Hunger can be endured when it feels temporary. Cold can be endured when it feels shared. But once a man realizes the enemy's ordinary is better than his own emergency, something inside him starts to fail. Carl does not say that out loud. He does not need to. He can hear it in the way the men stop joking. He can see it in the way they chew slower, almost respectfully, as if the ration deserves attention. One soldier holds the empty wrapper of the gum for far too long before slipping it into his pocket. Another saves half a cigarette he desperately wants now, not because he is disciplined, but because part of him wants proof later that he really saw this. Carl watches frost gather in the lashes of the youngest boy in the squad and realizes the boy is no longer looking at the forest. He is looking at a future that suddenly feels shorter. They try to melt snow in a dented tin over a weak hidden flame. It should feel like a small victory, and for a moment it does. Carl pours the coffee powder in and watches the dark color spread through the hot water like ink. The smell hits first. Not rich, not perfect, but unmistakable. Coffee. Real enough to wake memory, real enough to remind men of kitchens, train stations, factory breaks, homes they left before the war became this shapeless winter machine. Carl lifts the cup, but before he drinks, one of the others laughs under his breath and says, "Imagine." They are freezing too, and still drinking coffee. That line lands harder than the shelling, because it reveals the true offense of the ration. Not abundance alone. Stability. The enemy is not surviving the cold. The enemy has prepared for it. Carl takes one sip, and the heat is almost painful. He closes his eyes. For one dangerous second, it feels like safety. Then a voice from the darkness hisses, "Engines!" Everyone drops again. Weapons come up. The hidden flame is kicked out. The coffee spills black into the snow like something wasted in a church. Carl flattens against the frozen ground and feels the ration box crush between his chest and the earth. The engine sound grows, then fades, then returns from a different direction. False alarm. Or maybe not. Nobody can tell. That is the trick of the forest now. Sounds arrive broken. Distance lies, direction lies, hope lies. After a full minute, the sergeant signals to move. Carl rises with wet knees and cold coffee on his glove. He should be angry about the lost drink. Instead, he feels something worse, grief over how quickly even comfort becomes impossible here. He thinks of the Americans again, not as heroes, not as monsters, but as men who somehow managed to send drink powder, cigarettes, gum, and chocolate into this white nightmare and still keep moving. His fear deepens because he now understands the ration was not luck. It was routine. As the column snakes through the trees, Carl pulls out his mother's postcard again. He cannot read it in the dim light, but runs his thumb over the worn crease. Eat when you can, sleep when you can, come home when you can. The line feels cruel now. Food is no longer simple. Every bite invites comparison. Every swallow carries quiet humiliation. A biscuit becomes a question. Sugar becomes a calculation. A cigarette becomes proof that somewhere there was enough. Near dusk, they find another abandoned American position. Not a miracle, just scraps, torn wrappers, scattered tins. The men move in with restrained urgency, pretending not to be desperate. Carl kneels, brushing frost from a half-buried carton. Inside are crackers, chocolate, cigarettes. Someone exhales a curse like a prayer. The sergeant studies a packet and says, "Boys, we are not fighting soldiers. We are fighting a factory that feeds its fear." No one answers, but they feel it. Gunfire cracks suddenly. Men dive for cover. Carl presses into frozen ground, ration fragments biting his palm. Silence returns slowly. Beside him, a soldier whispers, "Coffee, sugar, cigarettes, gum, chocolate," again and again. Night brings confession. One admits saving crusts, another trading ammunition for sausage, another dreaming only of sitting without rushing. Then the question comes, if they can spare this for one man, what are we supposed to be? No one answers. Carl breaks chocolate, shares half silently. It melts slowly, faintly sweet, faintly bitter. It reminds him normal life exists somewhere, not here, but somewhere. And once felt, that distance cannot be forgotten. Orders come near midnight. Move again. No rest, no certainty. At a crossroads, a soldier grins wildly, saying the Americans feed better at the front. Another replies, then the war is already over. Carl keeps walking, the words settling inside him like ice. He does not argue, does not even look back. The forest seems narrower now, as if the trees themselves have leaned closer to listen. Boots grind softly in snow, each step measured, automatic, almost detached from thought. Somewhere far away, artillery flickers against the clouds. Carl imagines lines of supply, endless and invisible, stretching beyond anything he can fight. He tightens his grip on the ration, as if holding it might explain. Carl finally gets his set working for a few seconds at dawn. The message that comes through is broken, delayed, useless, units shifting, roads uncertain, supplies unclear. The sergeant listens, says nothing, then waves them onward. Carl wants to ask the question now pounding through him, but he does not dare. So he asks a smaller one instead. "Do you think they know?" The sergeant glances at him. "Who?" Carl swallows. "The Americans. Do you think they know what this does to us?" The sergeant looks ahead for a long time before answering. "Not because of the food itself," he says, "because of what it proves." Carl waits for more, but none comes. That is all. Yet it is enough. The ration was never about taste. It was about proof. Proof that one side could still afford foresight while the other was living hour to hour. Proof that some wars are lost long before men at the front are willing to admit it. Proof that even a cigarette pack can become strategy. By the time the sun rises pale over the trees, the ration box is empty. Carl keeps the cardboard anyway. He does not know why. Maybe because throwing it away would feel like denying what happened. Maybe because part of him hopes to show it to someone later and say, "You don't understand. It wasn't just food. It was a message." Around him, the others trudge on in silence, and that silence is different now. Yesterday's silence was fatigue. This one is calculation. Men measuring themselves against a truth they did not want. Men replaying what they said when the box first opened. Coffee, chocolate, gum, sugar, cigarettes. They sound like ordinary words, but in this forest, on this road, in these mouths, they become something else entirely, a confession. Carl looks down at the crushed cardboard in his hand and realizes he no longer fears the enemy the same way. Bullets are simple. Hunger is simple. Cold is simple. But what do you do when the thing breaking you is not what the enemy destroys, but what he can still provide? Years later, Carl will forget roads, ranks, even faces. He will forget which village was burning and which field was abandoned. He will forget the exact order of shells in the dark. But he will never forget the moment that little box opened in the snow and the men around him stopped sounding like soldiers and started sounding like witnesses. One had whispered, "They even have gum." Another had said, "This isn't special." Another had asked, "How do we defeat people who eat like this?" And the oldest voice among them had said, "Nothing at all," because sometimes silence is the final answer. Carl still kept his mother's postcard. He still remembered the line, "Eat when you can, come home when you can." But after that day, one question stayed with him longer than the hunger, longer than the cold, longer than the war itself. If that was what one American soldier carried in his pocket, then how many men had already understood in that single frozen second that the future no longer belonged to them?